Today, Eric and Stephanie Vin Watson joined me to talk about Fatty15. This is the company that they founded to sell a third essential oil and to bring awareness to a third essential oil, specifically C15-0. Eric and Stephanie, thank you so much for being here today.
Great, thanks, Brandy. Great to be here.
Can you share maybe for the people out there listening who don't know yet what an essential fatty acid is, let's start there.
Sure. Okay. So an essential fatty acid is a nutrient, a fatty acid that our bodies need in order to maintain our baseline health. So it means we have to have certain levels in our body in order to just stay baseline healthy. But our bodies don't make it on its own. Therefore, we have to get these fatty acids from our diet. So that makes it an essential fatty acid.
And there are currently 13 vitamins and 2 essential fatty acids, right? Vitamin A, vitamin D, and then 2 omega-3s, one type of omega-3, one type of omega-3, one type of omega-6, ALA and LA that are considered essential. And we discovered that there is a third, which is called C15 as an essential fatty acid.
And how did you discover that C15 is an essential fatty acid?
Sure. The funnest origin story ever, right? An essential fatty acid. So I'm a veterinary epidemiologist, and was working for the US Navy, helping to care for their population of bottlenose dolphins that live in the open ocean in San Diego Bay, an incredible population of large brain, long-lived mammals that at the Navy live on average 50% longer than dolphins in the wild. Really incredible population. And as the Navy had this increasing population of older bottlenose dolphins, geriatric dolphins, we went to understand basically what in the fish diet predicted the healthiest aging dolphins in this population. And one of the reasons we looked for it was our primary goal was to help improve the health of Navy dolphins, help them live as long and happy as possible. We noticed that some dolphins age healthier than other dolphins, and that led to our use of this advanced technology called metabolomics. It's the study of thousands of small molecules in our body and in dolphins' bodies that help us work. And so we used metabolomics to basically compare these molecules in healthy versus less healthy aging dolphins. And long story short, we discovered a list of about 100 small molecules that predicted healthy aging dolphins that had lower cholesterol, less inflammation, healthier livers, et cetera, et cetera. And among these 100 predictors of healthy dolphins, near the top was C15, also called pentadecanoic acid, that was highest in the healthiest aging dolphins.
And then we took all that data, right, and then we started working on it on the human side to see if we were seeing the same results in humans. And to make a very long story short, published in Nature, check it out.
Okay, that's awesome. Definitely linking to that in the show notes for this episode.
Great, thanks.
So with these two, where did you go from there? After you discovered this list of approximately 100 different metabolites in the healthiest of the dolphins, how did you arrive at, even though C15 was near the top of that list, how did you arrive at C15 really being the beneficial metabolite?
So our hypothesis, because all dolphins eat are healthy fish, our hypothesis initially was that it was going to be the omegas, right? It's going to be omega-3, omega-6. We predicted healthiest aging dolphins because they were eating some type of fish that was healthy, higher in omega-3s. And so we were specifically looking for fish-based nutrients as what would be top contenders on our list, Brandy. And so what happened, though, was that neither omega-3 nor omega-6 made that top list. And instead, as we looked at the molecules that made the top predictors of the healthiest dolphins, we wanted to see which ones could potentially meet that definition of essential, which is that if we got more of it in our diet, or dolphins got more in their diet, that we could increase those levels in the body and confer that benefit. This is differentiating it from molecules that our body makes. So it's a little harder to control how much molecule our body makes. We can much better control a molecule that's coming from the diet, specifically the fish, and raise it. So that's how we narrowed it down from the initial 100, which we are studying all of them. But to pick that, like you said, how do you pick that first one? We picked C15 because it looked like it was meeting this criteria of being a fish-based nutrient, that if the dolphins ate more of it, they could raise their levels, and therefore we could have control over conferring that benefit.
Okay. After establishing that C15 was so beneficial, were you able to backtrack to what was different in their diet, where they were getting it naturally? And it expands to the human question of, where do we get this naturally in our diets?
Sure, I'll start with the fish part,
Okay.
and then Eric can talk about the human. I'll talk about the dolphin part, and Eric can share the human part. So for the dolphins, they were getting different types of fish fed to them. So they not all dolphins received the same fish-based diet. The nice thing about the Navy is they were very closely tracking the specific diets that each dolphin was getting. And we found that a couple types of the fish that were being fed to the Navy dolphins had no C15 in it. So the first thing we did after we detected C15 as a predictor of better health is we went straight to really the 5 types of fish that were being fed to the Navy dolphins. We then submitted those fish for fatty acid analysis, and we were surprised to show that some fish had no detectable C15, while other fish had relatively high levels of C15. So that kind of, again, created a wonderful moment to say, gosh, this is something we could intervene in. And what happens just if we do something simple, like give dolphins a diet that's strictly with higher C15 fish? And we did that, and we showed that C15 levels increased in the dolphins, and that we saw conferred benefits. So that's kind of what tipped us off to how we could influence and raise C15 levels just based upon dietary changes. And then for humans.
Yeah, so on our side, we get most of our C15 from whole fat milk and dairy. And so it is in some fish, usually in the skin and heads, and there's some plants as well, but they're in very small amounts. So as a society, as we have stopped drinking whole fat dairy products and eating whole fat dairy products, we have been getting less and less of this C15 in this class of molecules, odd chain saturated fatty acids, into our diet. So in effect, we have created iatrogenically a deficiency as we have changed our eating habits. And certainly now we're moving to, plant-based milk replacements and food replacements, and many of those are also deficient in C15. So hence the deficiency is getting larger as we're moving forward as a society in this molecule.
Okay, I have a follow-up question for that. What about butter? And then also, what about ghee?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So butter, absolutely. In fact, butter is one of the highest C15 content foods, along with ghee, because it's basically concentrated dairy fat, right? And so it's a good source of C15. The only thing that we have found with whole fat dairy products and other foods that have C15 is it's accompanied by even chain saturated fat. So if we're talking about C15, it has an odd number, right? So odd number of carbons in the chain. It ends up odd chain saturated fats are conferring these health benefits, while even chain saturated fats like C16 and C18 present in much higher levels in these same types of foods like butter continue to be associated with what we're traditionally used to hearing about saturated fats, which is increased risk of type 2 diabetes, increased risk of heart disease. So our challenge was, how can we bring out and offer the good odd chain saturated fat without it having to be combined in foods with the even chain?
No, we are not saying go eat 3 sticks of butter every day, because you would get a whole lot of the even chain saturated fatty acids, and with whole fat milks, a lot of the calories as well, which would potentially be not beneficial for your health.
Okay. All right. I have a whole slew of follow-up questions on this. Maybe just kind of rounding out how saturated fats are handled by the body, because I really was under the impression that if you ingest saturated fats of any sort, then your body takes on the work of converting those into longer chain fatty acids. So the fact that this C15 is missing was a surprise to me. Would you guys be able to talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So we as a society, right, have been told to avoid all types of saturated fats, and that those recommendations continue to permeate, I know, the federal and global recommendations today. We're part of a movement to help educate people with that there's growing science now differentiating between good and bad saturated fatty acids, where the good fatty acid saturated fats are odd chain, the bad saturated fats are even chain. And importantly, Brandy, this isn't just coming from us. We had, published this paper in Scientific Reports back in May of 2020, proposing C15 as not only a good and beneficial saturated fat, but one that met the criteria of being an essential fatty acid. Since then, there have been over 24 studies coming from Harvard and Cambridge and Johns Hopkins and Kaiser Permanente, all showing that the same difference, that odd chain saturated fats, including C15, are associated with better health, lower risk of diabetes, lower risk of heart disease, of heart failure, basically a milieu of chronic conditions associated with metabolic and heart health. The opposite, in the same studies, they found that higher levels of even chain saturated fats associated with an increased risk of these same diseases. So there's been a very clear and consistent differentiation between good and bad saturated fats that's been now well established in the scientific realm. So now it's really about educating the general public about these scientific findings and what does that mean from nutritional recommendations.
Yeah, and as far as how they're metabolized, and I'll let you expand further, but so we actually thought it was C17 at first, and so it took studies from there, which Steph have shared, they've been published, to show that in fact the Goldilocks, the building block, the essential molecule was C15, and like you said, that gets elongated and it actually adds 2 carbons and then forms the other odd chain saturated fatty acid, whereas the even chains are metabolized in a different way.
Yeah, and then the last thing I'll mention is that why is odd versus even makes such a big difference on whether it's good or bad. And the answer appears, at least in part, to lie into how it's metabolized. So instead of how it's built up, it's how it's broken down. That when even chain saturated fatty acids break down, they always break down by 2 carbons. So the end result, the end metabolite, is acetoacetic acid, which is a pro-diabetic metabolite. Odd chain fatty acids also always break down by 2 carbons. So they're always stay odd, the evens always stay even. So the odd chain saturated fats break down to become propionic acid, which is a healthy metabolite that has been associated with good health. So the answer today, as far as one explanation for why the difference between the two appears to be the metabolites to which they're broken down into good and bad metabolites.
Okay. All right. Sorry. I was just thinking about botanical oils and the saturated fats that are in them. And most of the time, you're right, they're all even chain. I think the only other question around this is, what about carbohydrates? Is it possible to synthesize? Is it possible for the body to make an odd chain saturated fatty acid from carbs, or is it always even chain from those as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's appears that it's only the even chain that are made from carbohydrates and other, at least from a primary source. It's the science is pretty clean and clear that with C15, again, this being a Goldilocks odd chain fatty acid, that our body doesn't make enough of it, whether it's building up from other products or being broken down, that it really is meeting, again, this rare criteria of being an essential fatty acid, where we need to put it into our bodies so that it can go to work and help be beneficial in itself, but also create metabolites that are beneficial as well.
Okay. How much of it do we need in our daily diet?
So if we look at what we used to eat, so if we look back at the 40s and 50s, right? Because if the data are supporting, we know that our C15 levels as a population have been declining, and it makes sense because we're eating less food that has C15 in it. So if we go back to where we used as a population used to drink plenty of whole fat cow's milk and eat whole fat dairy, the average intake was usually between 100 to 300 milligrams per day. So it's not a massive amount. It's not a lot, but our bodies appear to be very sensitive and very attuned to, if we get just the low end or the low side of that, it tips into what appears to be a nutritional deficiency syndrome versus being able to maintain our baseline health. So it's a very narrow line, which is great because, from a supplement or food additive perspective, it's not difficult to be able to provide a highly bioavailable and pure C15 to help meet those daily nutritional needs.
Okay. So what are some of the health detriments that are seen when we fall into this deficient state?
Yeah, so the hypothesis, right, is that C15 deficiencies, nutritional deficiencies, may in fact be driving the global pandemics of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and fatty liver disease. So probably the most compelling today is this disease called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD. You know it well, yeah. Right? That advances into an aggressive disease called MASH, which is leading cause of liver transplants, now present in 1 in 4 people globally, and 1 in 10 children. So this shocking disease that came out of nowhere, right?
Right. Yeah.
So the question is, so as we had actually detected before the C15 discovery, that one of the conditions that older dolphins can develop is NAFLD, is fatty liver disease. It kind of started this whole parallel between human and dolphin nutrition and health. So we were approached by Dr. Jeff Schwimmer, who started the first fatty liver disease clinic for children at Rady Children's Hospital. Jeff read this study that we talked about, NAFLD and dolphins, and he said, "Oh, no way, it's the same disease that we're seeing in kids." He's like, send me some dolphin liver tissues that you have in the archives and let me take a look. And he came back, Randy, and he's like, I'll never forget the email. It said, "We are a go. The dolphins are getting the exact same liver disease as we're seeing emerging in children and adults globally." So this is fascinating because dolphins don't eat sugar. So one of the leading hypotheses for fatty liver disease was carbs and sugars. So he's just like, you just blew that out of the water, right? For at least for dolphins. So when we looked, so Jeff started looking into the C15 deficiency hypothesis, and he published a study last year where he looked at livers of over 300 children using digital radiography. MRI, and he showed in fact, that the higher amount of C15 children had in their blood was inversely correlated with the amount of fat they had in their liver. So we're sitting there and we're mapping out when whole fat dairy milk started getting removed from schools by USDA, and when pediatricians started telling parents that their kids need to come off whole fat milk. And it coincided with within about 5 to 10 years of fatty liver disease coming on the scene. So, right. So now it's just like, okay, well, did we have we caused a whole new disease, which is becoming quite serious globally, #1 cause of liver cancer in children, that is a fatty liver disease, by removing a saturated fat. And so Jeff is now leading the first clinical trial with a C15 supplement among young adults who have a history of fatty liver disease. So the good news is that this is something that we can easily act upon, right? So if in fact it's not just fatty liver disease, but the associated metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, that just by replenishing C15 back in our diet, that we can, we all want to say that we want to change the world, but I can honestly say that the dolphins have gifted us with an opportunity to truly help improve the world, global health. So it's exciting avenue that we're pursuing.
Yeah, I'd say that's very exciting. That's fantastic. Okay, how, just thinking along those lines, do you know how the C15 is actually helping, or, the additional C17, other odd chain fatty acids that are made from the C15, do you know how those are helping the liver? Is it helping it during a detox process, or is it helping, what is it doing exactly?
So we have a lot has emerged about how C15 works just over the last 12 to 18 months, which is really exciting. So we've been able to show, so first of all, nature has done an amazing job at creating a molecule that every mammal is given at birth, right? Because it's in milk, including mom's breast milk and moving forward through the dairy products. And so this molecule, C15, does a lot of things. So it's not like one target, like you think about a drug targets one thing and it has this single targeted benefit, which makes sense as an essential fatty acid, that it's called pleiotropic, which means it does a lot of different things. At the cellular level, C15 is a sturdy, saturated fat that goes into our cell membranes. Remember those lipid bilayer membranes that we have? So it's a lipid. So it goes into the cell membrane. And because it's a sturdy fat, unlike omega-3s and omega-6s are oils, and so they are less stable and susceptible to oxidation in our cells, C15 serves kind of a yin and yang role with the omega-3s, in which it's stable, not susceptible to oxidation, and keeps our cells sturdy and strong. So they're less likely to break down in the face of, like, in the liver or in the heart, that kind of exacerbates the inflammatory state in our tissues. So it makes cells stronger. We've also been able to show that it repairs mitochondrial function. So mitochondria, as we get older, our mitochondria stop functioning as well. It's a huge contributor to chronic diseases. And so we've been able to show that C15 has a direct effect on repairing mitochondrial function, giving energy to the cells. And then the third cellular based benefit that we had discovered was that it helps improve cellular signaling. So there are these receptors throughout our body called PPARs, alpha and delta, and these are well known to regulate our immunity, metabolism, but also our mood, appetite, and sleep. So it's like a mega receptor group. And we've been able to show that C15 naturally activates these receptors to help regulate inflammation and metabolism. And so it has well-documented benefits, which again makes sense. They're like little hammocks that have been sitting around waiting to be activated by eating the right foods. So those are the main benefits. And then that ladders up to, we've been able to show in the blood based studies that by doing this, it's been C15 supplementation's been shown to decrease cholesterol, glucose, multiple over 35 different components of inflammation. And so all of that combines to provide, again, this whole body health, and how can it have all these benefits with regard to decreasing the risk of diabetes and heart disease. That was a long answer.
Yeah, this conversation is just fascinating. I had no idea. Also with C15, you mentioned that the even chain fatty acids are associated more with a pro-diabetic state. With the odd chain fatty acids, are they associated with, do they help improve insulin sensitivity within the body?
They do. And so we have seen that in studies, and that is even further back by these large population-based studies where they tracked tens of thousands of people over a decade or more, showing that people with higher C15 are less likely to develop type 2 diabetes. Shorter studies with smaller groups of people have dug in further and shown that C15 is associated with improved glucose handling and therefore decreased issues with regard to insulin. And then when we get down to the cellular level, a couple of groups, one group showed that C15 is also an activator of what's called AMP-K, and AMP-K is actually the same mechanism as metformin, which is one of the top treatments for diabetes. And so they were able to show in cell-based systems that C15 activated AMP-K, and as a result helped with regulating glucose uptake in the cells.
Okay, what does this mean for the obesity epidemic?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is a saturated fat that has 1 calorie, and so we've seen, with the PPAR activation, people feel satiety. I mean, they are less hungry, and so, this is not something we want to say, take this and lose weight. That's not the point. But you activate the PPARs, the orchestrators of metabolism, and weight loss or that feeling of satiety is something that goes along with that. So could help.
And have C15 deficiencies, driven, certainly we have evidence that it's driving these chronic cardiometabolic diseases, a large component of which is obesity. Yeah. So again, it completely goes against everything we've been taught, right? Which is like saturated fat, and Brandy, you're on the, you're already well aware of, it's more the pandemic issues and the problems more increasingly point less to the wrong fats and more to too many carbohydrates and sugars. Yeah. So we're learning a lot. You can see
why we're trying to change the dietary guidelines around saturated fats. In fact, there's been a movement to change the name of saturated fats to stable versus unstable, stable being the saturated fats, unstable being other fats like, the PUFAs and things like that. We had the same question, obesity, diabetes, hypercholesterolemia. And so hence the reason we started the clinical trial for metabolic syndrome, looking at the precursors to all these diseases. And, one of the things that's amazing about the dolphins is they have the precursors to many of these diseases. They can get metabolic syndrome, but they don't get the end stage. So, they're a very healthy population to understand how early diseases manifest themselves into things like metabolic syndrome. And so part of the reason we did the clinical trial with the population Steph mentioned, which is younger adults, is because they have the precursors. They have metabolic syndrome, but they don't have any of the end stages. And generally they're not on long-term medications, and they haven't had that much time to manifest. So that study is near completion. And so we'll have more results soon.
For the supplement that Fatty15 sells, how do you guys make your, or where do you source your C15 from?
Right. No one had ever made this before, right? So that was bad because we had to develop it. It was good because we got to develop the perfect ingredient. And so we vetted a lot of different ways to make this. Ultimately, we wanted to use something that was sustainable, that was plant-based, and that could be scaled so we can, provide this to people living in Africa in hot environments. And so we use plant-based starting materials. And then we develop a pure, almost 100% powder C15 that's vegan friendly, that's sustainable, that is scalable. So we spent a lot of time making the ingredient that we thought would be the perfect ingredient.
Okay. Would you be able to talk a little bit about the isolation process for it from the plant material to what you pack into your, and here it's a capsule, right?
It is, right.
Okay.
So it's a pure powder capsule. The capsule you see has no fillers, no nothing. It is literally 100%, C15. And so we start with C14, which is a building block, right? And that can be from different plant-based sources like nutmeg and coconut. And then, we add a carbon to it and make it, very pure. So that it's something that we can scale. It's something sustainable that doesn't come from an animal source. It is non-allergen. It doesn't have allergens. It has nothing that people allergic to coconut or to nuts or nutmeg would be allergic to. And so that ingredient, we went ahead and got GRAS status for, so, submitting the safety studies and having a panel of experts look at it and determine that it was safe up to, 250 milligrams for people 4 years and older and during pregnancy and while you're lactating and that. So it's a very safe molecule and the way we make it. And the other reason to make that was, it's something that has a very long shelf life. So it's very resistant to oxidation and to going rancid and some of the problems you run into with other, essential fatty acids. And so, we spent a lot of time doing that. And so it was nice because, the 11 months after we launched, we won the Nutri-Ingredients and Nutritional Outlook Awards for, Ingredient Producer of the Year, which was great.
Yeah, and speaking of sustainability, you guys have a very nice way of packaging it as well, right?
Yeah, what we're trying to do is create something that's good for the world, good for our health, and good for the world too. And so we wanted to create packaging that was on the same level as this ingredient. So no plastics, all sustainable. We use glass, we use bamboo. We send you a bottle that is empty at first, so you can put your capsules into it. The capsules come in recycled pouches that you can use. So you get a bottle once, and then we send you refills for the future. And that keeps the footprint very low, the shipping weights low, the sustainability and the good for the environment theme going.
Okay. Another question about where you're growing these plants or what farms, I guess, what countries you're working with farms in, what countries are you working with farms in?
Yeah. And so we looked at a variety of people to make this, to help make this and be able to scale it. Because, the scaling up process to where we are now, which is, 10 tons of capability is actually not that easy to do. And so we required manufacturers that were knowledgeable in pharmaceuticals, but also in food grade products. And there's actually not that many that met our criteria of, GMP, FDA, appropriate. And so we currently work with two manufacturers. One is in the EU and one is in the United States.
Okay. Sir, one of the questions that I forgot to ask when we were on this part of the conversation, how do cows make C15?
So cows, it's a great question. So cows make C15 in their rumen. They have a very unique population of bacteria. And so it's these bacteria in the cow's rumen that are C15 making machines.
Okay.
And when the bacteria make the C15, it then passes through the rumen and gets absorbed. It becomes part of the milk product. So that's how they generate, which is another interesting aspect that's been looked at, is that because C15 is made by bacteria in the rumen, as cows have been fed different diets, that influences how much C15 is in their milk. So as cows have been moving away from their richest source of C15 producing bacteria is best fostered by grass-fed diets. So grass-fed butter is anticipated to have actually higher C15 than other types, based upon the cow's diet. Interestingly, there was a study done that even showed sheep, because this accounts for all ruminants, so whether you're a cow or sheep, showed that sheep, based upon the time of the year and which part of a mountain they were grazing off of, dictated how much C15 they got in their diet because of where the plants were on the mountain. And then that drove how much C15 was in their milk. So it becomes very sensitive. So if we even look today, the high whole fat milk that we drank from the 1950s is absolutely expected to have had higher C15 than the what's present in whole fat milk today, again, among non-grass fed
and if we
cows.
look in our oceans, the same thing is happening, whereas the warming of the oceans have left us with fish that have less fat in them and less C15. So it's kind of happening across land and ocean.
Okay. This is by far the most fascinating conversation I've had on the podcast.
No, that's great.
We love it.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you guys would like to talk about, either as related to C15 or as related? Because I would like to circle back around and ask, as you look more and more at the metabolomics, and if you identify additional compounds that you would like to take, that you would like to provide as supplements, is your intention to offer those through Fatty15 or to generate another company for those, or is it too early at this point to know?
Yeah, so a lot of things to unpack there, which is fun. So one, we would like help with getting this word out, right? And so, it's like, we've been, essential fatty acids, vitamins have been around for a long time. Those discoveries were made a long time ago. It is amazing that we haven't discovered other ones in the last 90 years. So we're trying to, open up another avenue of nutrition, a new age of nutrition, to say that using these advanced technologies like the multi-omics and metabolomics, you can actually find nutrients that are essential micronutrients. And so one of these, and our first, as you led it to, is the C15 molecule. And the world needs to know that not all fats are bad, which I think people are starting to realize, but not all saturated fats are bad. And in fact, some are essential for our diet and we may be deficient in it. And so, our goal is to get the word out, and hence, we are FA15, fatty acid 15, is a food ingredient, and that's what we would like to get out to the world. Part of the way we're doing that is through this supplement, and we named it Fatty15, right? Because it's an essential fat, it's got 15 carbons in its backbone. But part of that name was to get the word out, to get people talking about, that this is an essential part of our diet that we're missing. So any help in getting that word out is outstanding and very much appreciated.
Well, thank you both so much for being here. As we begin to wrap up, how can people connect with you?
Sure. Well, they can visit us at fatty15.com. So that's pretty straightforward. And then we have an info at fatty15.com that we're very accessible. If people wanted to reach out, ask questions, share their thoughts. We are a startup military family, and we're very eager to be able to do well and do good. And Brandy, thank you for the opportunity to be able to share the story. And we hope that people really start talking about it, chatting about it, and we'll continue to follow the science. And we're confident that C15 is just the first, and there's just a lot more discoveries to be made, again, not just by us, but by the world, as these wonderful technologies really come to light, not just in the drug and development world, but it just as importantly in the nutrition space too.
And we'll leave you with, on that note, we do have another discovery that, knock on wood, will be published relatively soon.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Eric and Stephanie, both for being here today. This has been a great conversation.
Great. Thanks, Fran. It's been a pleasure. Super fun.